With that, let me just get started and a quick introduction about myself. I'm Shrikala. I'm the co-founder of Crackverbal. I have been in the IT industry for quite some time. I worked for HP for around 7 years, post which I have been heading the admissions and sales at Crackverbal. I'm also part of the ISB Goldman Sachs Women Entrepreneur Program. I'm also part of the Cherry Blair Foundation, where I help women entrepreneurs get to their entrepreneurial goals, right? With that, let me just introduce you to our guest for the day, Sherin. Sherin is an MBA from Duke, which is Fuqua School of Business. She works for Apple currently in the supply chain management domain. So Sherin, if you could just introduce yourself and take it from here.
Hi, Shrikala. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm Sherin, as Shrikala mentioned. I have about 9 years of experience now, both in the retail analytics space as well as the supply demand management space. So it's been an interesting journey. I did not know whether I wanted to do an MBA, so I had a lot of questions in my mind when I was applying to schools. And then once I applied, and I really enjoyed that journey, and now I'm in a place where I can help a lot of people. So that's what I really like to do. And when I get free time, I also enjoy hiking, biking, and so many other activities, and playing with my 1-year-old nephew. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And then we can talk a lot more about the application process and so on in the future in the next 40 minutes or so.
Right. Thank you so much, Sherin. So Sherin, before, just to get started, if you could just tell us a little bit about your pre-MBA journey. All of us want to know that, before your MBA, what were you doing? How long did you work? What was your background? And why did an MBA, even come to your mind?
Yeah. So I graduated from BITS Pilani in 2008. I was somehow, so we have this program where 6 months we have a compulsory internship, which is assigned within the school. And I got selected for Oracle. So I go in and I was determined to do software engineering, some coding, just like what my undergrad education would do. But at the end of the day, I was matched with this retail analytics group. And at that time, nobody knew analytics, nobody knew retail, because India didn't have that much retail space back then. But then I did the internship and I really liked it. I enjoyed working with numbers, and it was all building statistical models and whatnot. It was interesting, although it was kind of limiting career too, because when I look back and think about, what would I do 2 years from now? There were not many options. And then I'll have to branch out and pick something else other than what I really enjoyed doing. Keeping that in mind, when I hit the 4-year mark, I was like, I have explored everything I can within the team and within the group. I had got a couple of promotions. I started managing a team, and being in India, and in that space, it was that was pretty much it. And then when I started evaluating my options, either I can move to the US team within the same group and do the same thing, or do something more exciting and see what else is out there. So that's when I started pursuing the option about MBA. I did apply the first time I applied without thinking much, without thinking why I really need an MBA. And of course, my essays showed it. And I did not get any admission from 90% of the schools I applied. And the other one I got, and I was like, maybe I need to revisit how I'm thinking about MBA or why I need an MBA, so that I have more clarity for myself. And then the second time I applied again the very next year, and then I applied to Fuqua in the early admission because I really felt connected to the school. So that's pretty much my journey. And now I did not have any supply chain background back then, just so everybody is aware. So you don't need that background when you want to pursue a career in the supply chain management space.
Okay, great. So Sherin, tell me one thing. You mentioned that you were more from the analytics background, right? So when you were actually trying to portray, what exactly you want to do, what was your thought process when you were putting that, say, in your essays or in your stories?
So the way I approached my essays were thinking about what are the different functions I can get into, and what are the different industries I want to pursue, and how I can connect my pre-MBA experience to what I would potentially want to do in post-MBA journey. So for example, I was in the retail analytics space, but there are some key skills I come along with. Really good with numbers. I can I can make decisions, like informed decisions from the facts and figures that I have. I work really well with the cross-functional teams. And then since I worked in the retail analytics space, if you think about retail and then try and connect it with operations, that made sense. So it was more operation strategy and or retail strategy and consulting and so on. Then the other part is the industry, right? As I said earlier. Now for the industry, of course, CPG companies comes to my mind first because I have some experience in the retail space, so that is directly relatable. And then, of course, I worked in Oracle, so technology companies will make the cut for sure. And then, so my core focus was technology, operations, product management, and internal consulting. So this is how I try to relate my experience and the skills I come with so that I can build upon that skills post-MBA.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. Interesting. So tell us a little bit about supply chain and, what exactly is this about, since you work for Apple. And I think, that's where, the major, work on supply chain happens. So if you could just tell us a little bit about that, what is supply chain all about, and, more around that.
Yeah. So I think everybody, even if they're not really working closer to supply chain, everybody's aware of what supply demand problems are, because that's basics in terms of our everyday life. If you want to buy a house, and if you can't get a house, it is a supply demand problem, because you have demand, maybe there's no supply, or there is too much supply, less demand, or any angle you can think about. So when I take a step back and think about supply chain management, it's more about marrying that supply and demand piece together. Common sense, basic common sense, right? And that's the reason I said earlier, personally, I don't think you need a good supply chain background to pursue a career in supply chain, because it is common sense. Right. Now, depending on the company and depending on the kind of products that company makes, supply chain can be very different. So let's take like two different segments here, right? There is one set of companies which are the physical products that they are selling. For that, the supply chain is kind of long, where you start with, anything starts with planning. You need to understand what the potential demand is. So you start with planning, and then you go and get the materials to make that product. You have some factories that is assembling or making these physical product. And then there is shipments that happens. Then there is logistics that may take these units to the customer. And once it reaches the customer, you also have this whole feedback loop, right? Because you need to understand whether the customer got it, is there more demand for the customer, and so on. So you kind of manage the channels. And then at the end of the day, after the units are there, you still have services that you provide. And then the whole cycle repeats. So every segment in between, there is an opportunity for a career. So you can be in the planning, which is what I do. You can be in the procurement side, where you work with suppliers and vendors to make sure you have the right set of materials to make that product. And then you can be in the factory operations, coordinating all the activities within the factories. You can be in logistics, taking care of how to ship, where to ship, how to do the charter management and whatnot. You can be in the customer space, where you partner directly with your different channels of customers, and then get understanding and being the bridge between the channels and the supply chain. And then you can be in the services side. In Apple's case, it's Apple Care side, right? So this is like a typical hardware or a physical product company. And now, if you think about a services company, that could be slightly different, because you cut down some of these actually making the product, that segment. Then your focus is probably more on, you plan something, You make sure it is packaged into a software or licensing, and then sell it to customers, and how it impacts the bottom line. Whether you're in the physical units side, or if you're in the software or businesses services side, supply chain has a huge impact on how your bottom line, the revenue, the margins of the company, the P&L, and so on. So in the whole supply chain side, you are basically interacting with not just your supply chain, you have other counterparts like sales, marketing, finance, and the revenue group, because at the end of the day, it's all put together and goes into the company's P&L.
Right. So you mentioned that, in the entire chain of this operations, right, there are different people who are responsible for different work at every stage, right, from planning to procurement to, execution to delivery, right? So typically, when you say, somebody is handling a supply chain or somebody is a supply chain manager, what are their typical KRAs? Are these people who are responsible for the entire flow from planning to execution to delivery, or they are people who might be managing specific, areas or channels of this whole piece?
Yeah, it depends. If you're in a large company like Apple, there are specific groups that take care of each of the different segments. For example, we have, there is a planning team dedicated for demand planning as well as supply allocation, because you can't just plan and move on, right? When you get all this feedback from rest of the supply chain, you need to make strategic decisions on, how much do I give to each of the different geographies or partners and so on. So Apple has like specific planning function. And then there is this procurement as a huge organization that is a different independent organization. And then there is product ops. Then there is Apple Care, which is on the services side. Then there is channel management. So some of it is together under the, all of it is under the operations umbrella, but some of it is more focused on the supply chain. Some of it is more focused on the revenue and services side. Whereas if you think about a smaller company, say you want to work for a startup, there may not be that clear distinction on who does what. You might be the same person doing the planning and talking to the vendor, getting the materials, making the units, or managing with the factory and working on the logistics. You might be the same person doing all these different functions. So it depends on the company size, what kind of products or services you are making, and how complicated your supply chain is.
Right. So if I understand, it's more on to manage the entire operations than, we have any relation to any revenue goal, right? So no part of the supply chain focuses on any revenue bit, correct?
Revenue bit, you mean?
You mean you're not responsible for any revenue goals or anything? It's completely more.
You are. So I work on the business planning function. So I started as a product planner at Apple, where my focus has been on making sure the product I'm responsible, I own it, I do the demand planning, I do the supply management and whatnot. Now I am responsible for business planning for iPad business. So the way that works is I'm looking at the iPad portfolio, and I'm part of what the current quarter plan is, which goes into the earnings call as this is our guidance for this quarter, how we think we will do. Of course, it rolls up as a company, but then the iPad segment I own. And then during the quarter, I look at what my next year looks like and what that plan will look like. And these are used for roadmap decisions on how much to invest in the CapEx and how much, or whether the roadmap makes sense, because it's not, so maybe this is a difference in how the hardware business is versus software side, because in the hardware business, revenue is very dependent on the number of units you're selling. And the number of units is determined by how you plan. And how you plan is also what is determining how much you will be able to sell, right? So there is a really good connection between the whole revenue planning side and the supply chain on most of the hardware businesses. And by the end of the quarter, we need to make sure we gave this number. This is what the Wall Street and everybody, this is the public information. This is what Apple as a company is expected to do. So all the different businesses make sure whatever we put as target, we are able to hit that. And there are a lot of mechanisms which we try to pull to make sure we hit that quarter. And if that doesn't happen, we need to figure out, like, if one business is not able to hit the target, how do you manage across different businesses and come together as a company? So yes, there is a huge impact on how we manage revenue on the supply chain.
Right. And this also involves working with multiple teams to understand how to get this
Absolutely.
done.
Yeah.
Right. Another question I had is, on the typical career path that people have in this industry, right? Especially when they're, if you're specifically looking at a supply chain domain. So what are your thoughts on it? Might differ from industry to industry, like you said, hardware to software to services, but more from your perspective, what do you think is the typical career progression that people have?
So I think about it as both vertical growth as well as horizontal growth. Generally, all of us think growth as a vertical growth, right? That's a general expectation, but it doesn't have to be. So the way I look at it is vertical growth, of course, you can join as like maybe a planner, maybe a program manager who is responsible for certain components, or a supply manager, a category manager. There could be like multiple definitions depending on if you're in the tech industry, retail industry, maybe oil and gas and whatnot. From there, how you progress, a lot of it is dependent on what that company structure is like. Because of course, if there will be a lot of people at the first level. And then as you grow up, the number of people at the top is like really low. So everybody can't grow into that vertical path, similar to any other industry. Now, can we define the roles? Yes. So you can own one product, to owning multiple products, to owning a business, to owning a big organization. So from that, you would be like, you'll be manager, director, VP, and maybe COO, and maybe even CEO at some point, right? So that is the vertical path. Now, the reason I said horizontal, which for me makes sense, is because if you think about the supply chain, or forget about supply chain, operations as a whole, there are so many different segments that comes under operations. So tomorrow, if say you want to start a company of your own, it would be great to have an understanding on what each of these segments do. In which case you would want to know, oh, let me experience planning side for some time and understand like how a business is planned and how the revenue is built into that plan and so on. And then you may want to go into the procurement side and understand how the negotiation process works. How do you think about hedging some of the contracts and deals and so on. And then you may want to understand how the factory operations work, or if you're in the software or licensing that end, how do you manage with different clients and different partners and so on. So you may want to have different types of these experience, which will help you think holistically on how to run a business. So that is what I meant by the horizontal career growth, which you can pursue.
Right. Right. Sherin, I have a question here. This is more around when you say the career progression across different industries also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you think, across geographies also it might, I know you have been exposed to more on the US aspect of it, but in your view, do you think there is a change across geographies in terms of how things happen in supply chain, or it's pretty much the same everywhere?
My take on it is it should be pretty much the same, because the fundamentals are the same, the business concepts are the same. Supply chain is supply chain. You have an end customer, you have that is what your end goal is, making sure what the end customer needs is what is given to the end customer. So I wouldn't expect major differences. Where the differences could come based on the geography is, let's say, or maybe it is industry. Some of the industries or some of the companies, what they do is just focus on one particular aspect of the supply chain, and then they outsource the other aspects. So the way you interact with and the way what you are responsible for could be different. But I wouldn't expect a major difference based on geography on the supply chain or the roles or the responsibilities in that sense.
Right, right. So, Sharon, coming to the next part, which is, you touched a little bit on this in the beginning itself, on that what do admissions committee actually look for? So maybe it was slightly different when you applied, because that time it was fresh, and not many people knew too much about even analytics, or the market was not as mature as it is right now, right? So if you are looking at it from an admission committee perspective, since you have mentored so many students over the years, what are your thoughts on, say, if someone says, I want to pursue my career in operations or supply chain, what do you think are the key aspects? You have touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but if you could just, elaborate a
Yeah,
little bit
absolutely.
on the key traits that they would look at.
Yeah, what the school looks at, like, let's keep supply chain aside for some time, right? And then when you think about what the school looks for, it's equally important for the school to like you, like you like the school. It's a two-way connection. And the way school likes you is, one is definitely employability. You need to have realistic career goals and passion and so on, right? Because if you come from, let's say if you're a dancer in your pre-MBA career and you say you want to be a software engineer after MBA, it's not going to happen. There is no way you can justify that unless you have like really good reasons why you're saying that. So there is a connection between what are the key attributes in a career to what you're saying you want to do in your essays, and what you have done in your pre-MBA journey. So when you think about supply chain management, let's say you're putting your short-term career goal as, I want to be a supply chain manager, or I want to be a procurement manager. You may not have that experience, and that's okay. What you need to understand is, what are the key attributes or key traits of a successful person in that particular segment? Have I exemplified those traits in my pre-MBA career? Focus on those. And then similarly, if you want to make an industry change, or if you want to stay in the same industry, is there a real reason why you think you can achieve it? So from an AdCom perspective, I mean, let's put a disclaimer here. I'm not AdCom. I haven't reviewed any essays. I've done some interviews with schools, but not essay reviews. So whatever I say, it's my personal opinion. Anyways, now when you think about, so for AdCom, what they're looking for is, you need to have a clear goal, and you need to, the more specific you can get, the easier for them to understand where you're coming from and what you want to do. So for example, when you think about a supply chain role, you're going to interact with so many different teams and different functions within a company. So that cross-functional collaboration is like one of the key aspects. And you can definitely highlight that aspect from your pre-MBA career. The second one I would say is communication and having that business acumen. And it doesn't have to be in that particular industry, but it's more about, you could have examples where you displayed some of these attributes where you are making the decisions, you are organizing something, you are helping people get through certain hurdles and so on. And then of course, you need to have that ownership and the passion and the drive to make things happen, because a lot of times in the supply chain space, you need to make decisions quick, and it needs to be, you may not have all the data. So can you think about examples where you could have done a perfect job, but an 18-20 rule works in most of the cases in a supply chain case, because the later you make a decision, there is a huge implication on the bottom line, and you don't want that. So you need to be able to make those fast decisions based on the information available to you at the moment. And you need to be able to look at all the corner cases from that, from whatever you know at that moment. So these are some examples of some of the key traits, and this is something you can find in any job you are in. And you don't need to be a supply chain specialist or an expert to focus on these. Does that make sense, Srikala?
Yeah, absolutely. So, adding to what Sherin said, I think what makes, more impact in when you're trying to focus on what you want to tell the adcom is it has to be something that connect dots, right? It cannot be something that is completely disconnected, and it's not mapping to what your current skills are, and it doesn't map to what you eventually want to do. So there has to be something that connects to what you are doing now to what you want to do eventually, right? It could be skills, it could be experience, it could be anything, right? So correct, Sharon?
That's correct.
So, Sharon, since you have gone through doing an MBA from one of the top schools in US, right?
Mm-hmm.
There, from your journey from before your MBA to now, what do you think has been the key difference in the way you think, the way you look at a problem, the way your perspective towards a lot of things specifically at work, right? So how do you think how do you think an MBA has actually changed the way you look at things, and how are things different now for you?
So for me, the biggest and the most important, which I would think for the rest of my career, is when you are working in your pre-MBA career, right? Most of the people you interact with are from that same category who has done exactly similar things as you. For example, even when I was in the retail analytics space, my coworkers are all engineers. And the teams which I interact with, they're all engineers. And everybody thinks in a very similar way because everybody comes from a similar background. When you go to an MBA, suddenly you see a lot of unconventional path, and then it's hard to relate. It's very hard for you to relate to them sometimes, but then you learn a lot from them, how creative their thought process are and how different their thought process are from you. So for example, at Fuqua, we have a class size of roughly like 550 to 600, and then we are divided into 70 to 75 people, smaller groups. And even within that, those are sections. And then even within that, we have about like 6 people, smaller project core group. So these are my small teams who I interact with a lot during the 2 years of MBA. All my classes are with them, my projects are with them, and then all the assignments are with them. So we interact a lot with these people. And that 6-member team is chosen so well. No two people have the same background. So in my team, I had one person who's from nonprofit, one person who was an accountant, another one who has the military background, and another one who was a retail specialist, and a fifth one who was from the education background, and I was there with an engineering background. Things that are so obvious to us, or so obvious to me, when we sit together in a team and discuss, there are so many different ideas that come from, and I'm like, wow, I could have never thought about that angle. So that the kind of class and the kind of subsegments within the class in the school you're applying, that is really, really important on how you change your thought process and the structure of what matters to you. And it also helps to develop you as a person because you're more open to different ideas. And like, I would have been like, oh, no, I don't think that's right. Because a lot of things you are set on something and you don't want to change. But then it opens up your mind and it opens up your ability to think. So that was the biggest for me. And the second one I would say is the classes in a B school. I don't think about it as something you have to get the best score on. It's beyond that. The classroom discussions make the best use of it, right? And then there are a lot of professors, because a lot of these are based on case studies. And the professors, the way they help you structure your thought process and approach a problem and make a decision. you're staying at a very high level. Maybe you're staying at a 50,000 feet height and thinking about the problem, about that business. And then when you get into the actual professional life, you need to get into the bottom of it. So that's a big transition, but you're able to zoom out and think about the big picture and the business, which probably I wouldn't have been able to being in the role I was pre-MBA. And then the final thing I would say is I have the network that is made now, because tomorrow, if I need to find a job, or if I need to start something on my own, or if I want to just toss an idea, my network is huge. And I would say that is the best investment in the whole MBA journey, because the network you get it covers anything you can think of forever in your life. Because when I was looking at jobs post-MBA, I wanted to be in the product management space in a tech company where the on-campus options were limited. And I started looking at it, and I decided, okay, I'm going to do this off campus. I'm going to make use of my network. And I've reached out to many people, and they're like so open and talking to you, guiding you through the process and referring you and so on. It is amazing how that network works. So if it could work in such a small thing like finding a job, I'm sure this is the same network which will be the big lever for me the rest of my career. So I think these are the three most important things I took away from my MBA journey.
Sherin, I had one more question. A lot of people say that the kind of job you land onto depends a lot on the internships that you have, the internships that you do while doing your MBA. So how does it actually work?
Not true, because I did my internship at Marriott as an intern in an internal strategy role. So I went to B school thinking I want to be a consultant, but then in the first 2 weeks I realized probably that's not the right career for me. But I still wanted to think about what the strategy part looks like. And then I landed this internship at Marriott, which is an internal strategy role where we were looking at the digital consulting and how to digitize a lot of Marriott's business. I really liked it, and I enjoyed it. I would love to go back at some point. But here, this was my biggest problem. When you think about some hypothetical case and make a suggestion and move on, I was not happy with it. I wanted to be part of implementing that too. So for me, just being a strategy consultant did not work at the time. I felt I needed to do more than that. And I wanted to be part of that team that executes and makes sure that strategy is actually live. So then when I finished my internship and I started thinking about my full-time, I'm like, what are my potential options? Then again, right, you have to connect, not one-to-one mapping. Like, you don't have to be exactly that same career in internship or your pre-MBA on what you want to do post-MBA. But you need to be able to connect. What are the key skills you bring? What are the key experiences you bring? And then you look at different roles that could potentially be a match and see where you can highlight your experiences. So it's about how you pitch your experiences and how you pitch what you want to do and connecting that story. Again, going back to Srikala's earlier point, connecting that dots is a key to land the job you want. Keep in mind, you can't be like transitioning from a completely different career. That it's possible, but it's hard. But it's always easy if you can connect the right skills to the job you want to do.
Right. So you typically get one internship option, or you get two internship options, especially when you're looking
at... You could have multiple options. So one is like designed as part of the program. After you complete first year, there is a 2 to 3 month period where it is designed for you to have an internship. There are, depending on the schools, multiple options where you can do part-time, smaller internships and projects with local companies around your area. For example, Fuqua had this thing called FCCP, which is Fuqua Consulting Curriculum Practicum. I may not have said that right, but anyways, so it is an opportunity for finding. There are a list of companies. It's local companies, smaller startups or smaller firms, who's looking for some additional help. This is not a paid internship, but it's spanning over a period of 5 to 6 months during your coursework. So you will be interacting with them on maybe like few hours a week, and then consulting with them to figure out what their problem is, what could be the potential opportunities are, and what could be the potential solutions to their problems. So that's another way to get some industry experience and having some consulting experience. And then there is also projects that faculty members might be doing, which you may be able to join them in doing some research and helping them with that. So there are different opportunities, but yeah, one is designed for the particular school or almost all schools.
Right. Some schools also have, they work on live business cases, right? From companies. Does that happen at Fuqua also?
Yeah, that's what I was telling earlier. The FCCP, the Fuqua Consulting Practicum, that is exactly the same, because you are associated with a client, which is mostly local, some are international too, where people have traveled specifically for a project.
Right. How did Apple happen?
It was kind of different. Maybe I should tell this because most of you are international candidates and visa will be an issue. So as I said earlier, I was specifically looking for product management roles in the technology companies, but I also wanted to utilize what I gained from my pre-MBA journey. So there was this company I interviewed with. I really liked the role. It was in the pricing optimization space, which I've done before. And then it was a product manager role. So in all sense, it was like a great fit for me. I got the offer. I signed the offer. Everything was great. And then they came back and said, hey, we have not actually hired MBAs in this company. So we have a policy where you need to have at least 1 year of valid OPT before we apply for your H-1B visa. And for MBA, right now, most schools have a STEM degree that is associated with an MBA, which gives you 3 years of work permit. Back in that time, it was not the case. So I had 1 year of OPT, and based on their rules, I wouldn't be eligible to get an H-1B because I would have finished my OPT by the time they put their H-1B in. So that wouldn't work for me. And they said, oh, if that be the case, we can't offer you. And I'm like, oh, that was like a really good role for me. And so we started negotiating a little bit. And then they agreed, okay, they will apply for my H-1B before I join the team, which make an exception like that. And if I get the H-1B, I will have the job. If I don't get the H-1B, my offer will be revoked. I said, okay, fine, go ahead, but I will also look at other options. And then this was in January or so. And then I started looking, and there were multiple interview forums, which happens in different cities within the US. And there was one West Coast interview forum, which was happening in San Francisco. So I looked at our options, and so until then, I have not thought about a career in supply chain management or anything related to operations. I did not take any courses in school that is operations, except for the basic compulsory one. So then when I saw the options and I read the description for Apple, I was like, that is interesting, because it definitely require my skills to be good with numbers. It requires the skills that needs a cross-functional engagement. And it also has a lot of strategic part to it, as well as execution. So when I read the description, I was like, oh, this could be an interesting role. So I applied for it. I got an interview. So I flew down here, and that's how Apple happened. And then once I got the Apple offer, I told the other guys, listen, I'm still waiting to hear back on the H-1B. So it might be a better option for me to take this. And they were very supportive. So I took Apple offer, and then they got back to me a few days later saying I got the H-1B, but then I had to let it go and take my chance for the next year. But it all worked out. Yeah. So it was kind of a very different journey than most of the MBA candidates. But yeah.
Right. Very interesting. In fact, for all of you, I think now the way the H-1B visa is, the amount of options you have has changed. So I think we should have a separate session where we'll focus slightly more detail on this. So, for now, I think we can see what it is. Yeah. So cool. So great insights, Sherin. I think this was really helpful for all of them. Guys, I'll just take up questions. If you have any specific questions, please put it on the Q&A window, and we will take up questions which are relevant to this particular webinar, right? So let me go from the bottom. So there's someone who asks that what are the few electives that you would want to choose if you're specifically looking at supply chain?
If you're interested, most schools have a supply chain track which could talk about the key operations principles, and economics should go along with it. So basics of economics will also be a good course. And another good course would be something in decision making or decision trees and structures, because a lot of times it's a question of, oh, should we do this or should we not do this? Then comes a lot of other questions like, if we do this, what is the implication? There's a lot of what if scenarios, and you need to be flexible around those what if scenarios. So any course that has like decision trees and decision making, that would be a good course to take. We had one at Fuqua like that, which I thought was really great. Then there is also a lot of another course which could potentially be helpful is managerial accounting, because there could be a lot of, within the supply chain and operations space, there could be some roles that are CapEx decisions and biz ops, where ops finance, to put it another way, who make decisions on what the CapEx should be or how it impacts the company bottom line and so on. So managerial accounting could be a helpful course, although I haven't taken it. I've heard really good things about how it could connect. I think, yeah. Check on what the supply chain track is and see how it helps.
Right. Thanks. There's someone who's asking, does this job role involve a lot of travel?
It depends. So my role, since I'm doing planning, it doesn't involve travel at all. But if you're in a role where you're in the procurement side or a factory operations side from a hardware business, it involves a lot of travel, because a lot of your suppliers and vendors are not in the US, and you have these contract negotiations and price negotiations and so on, where you do face-to-face. So that will involve a lot of travel. And then if you're in the services space or in the software licensing, maybe you have different client engagements in different places, which may involve some travel. So it depends on which part of the supply chain you are.
Right. Someone here is asking, does school have placements? It's a very Indian term. But do we have placements?
Yeah, every school will have some companies at least coming on campus. And then my suggestion always is you need to have a backup plan in mind. And this is why having some clear goals when you go to business school is important, because things could get really busy real fast and you could get lost. So if you have some clear goals in mind and work towards that, you will be fine. So keep some, use your personal networks, use your professional network, use your classmates' networks. Some of the classmates may have been working in a company where you want to work for in the future. So there could be a great resource to refer you because they know you now, right? So leverage all these networks if the school doesn't have good on-campus placements.
Right. We have someone who's asking, some people talk about a career in supply chain, some people talk about a career in operations. Is it a similar role or is it just a subset?
It's very similar. Supply chain is part of the bigger operations org in most companies.
Right, right. I think the other question says, how does Fuqua help you in molding into an operations role? I guess we've already
Yeah.
spoken about this. Let me just quickly go through any other relevant question here. Somebody has asked whether what kind of role, Vijay, actually we've spoken about this as part of the webinar. We spoke about the kind of roles you could get into when you're looking at supply chain. Um, is there something called the best school for supply chain? Your
There
thoughts?
are some schools who have not just an MBA, but also logistics programs and different parts of supply chain. There are different specific master's programs in different segments of supply chain. Those schools does have an advantage because they would have already made the industry connections and have a bigger pool of recruiting companies. So that might make them get an advantage. But these are what I've seen is there are a lot of people who come from Michigan Broad who have a lot of other supply chain management programs. So it's the same thing, like, and they are located in Michigan, which has a lot of manufacturing companies. So it would make sense.
Right.
And similarly, like MIT has a good supply chain master's program. Again, that would help having that connection established, which can be leveraged for MBA. Most of the other schools, they all have something or the other in there and have a specific track for supply chain. But at the end of the day, some of it might be on you to figure out if you want to be very focused and very specific on a certain path.
Right, right. One last question. I think it's relevant. Let me take it. It says, as you're part of the supply chain planning role, does this role also demand you on your part to have a lot of knowledge about multiple planning tools in the market, such as big names, SAP Integrated Business Planning or D-Mantra or other planning algorithms?
Again, depends on the company. For Apple, we don't use any of the planning tools. We use Excel.
Wow.
As simple as it sounds, that's how flexible we are. There is a reason for it to be that way. And then we also realize a lot of times, oh, the business complexity is so large that Excel can handle. So we are creating tools and systems internal instead of buying a package solution. So I would say it depends on the company and depends on how flexible they are and training you versus you knowing it all ahead of time.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Sherin. Now, one last thing just before we go, all those people who are looking at starting to apply, there is a course which can be, you just need to use this coupon code called Crack MBA 2019, and you can get access to it. And these have videos on post-MBA career goals. It will give you a great idea on how to go about and what you need to understand when it comes to post-MBA career goals. Cool. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much, Sherin. It was really, really insightful and fun listening to you. We got a lot of understanding and insights on what it takes to get into a role, such as yours, and more about your journey. Very, very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys, for being part of this webinar. Tomorrow morning at 10:30, we have something on IT project management. So if you're interested in project management, please don't miss that webinar too. Thank you, Sherin, once again.
Thanks a lot, Srikala, and thanks everyone for listening. Bye.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Good night, guys. Bye.